The year 2247 marked humanity's greatest achievement when Earth finally joined the Galactic Council. After decades of preparation and proving themselves capable of interstellar travel, humans were granted permission to enter the vast community of alien civilizations that spanned across the galaxy. Ambassador Claire Martinez stood in the Grand Council chamber for the first time, surrounded by representatives from 47 different species. Some looked like walking crystals that refracted light in beautiful patterns, while others were gaseous beings contained in specialized suits. There were species with multiple limbs, species with no visible limbs at all, and creatures that defied every expectation humanity had imagined. Claire felt her heart race with excitement as she addressed the council, promising that humanity would be worthy partners in exploring and protecting the galaxy. The council members listened to her speech with what could only be described as polite boredom. The Xanthari representative, a tall being with dark purple skin and 4 arms, barely looked up from his datapad during her entire introduction. The ancient Vorquin chairman, whose species had been traveling the stars for over 10,000 years, acknowledged Earth's admission with a brief nod and immediately moved on to other business. Claire tried not to feel discouraged as she took her assigned seat in the far back corner of the chamber, a position that clearly indicated humanity's low status among the galactic powers. She reminded herself that this was just the beginning, and that humans would prove their worth through actions rather than words. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the Pathfinder, one of Earth's newest exploration vessels. His ship was modest compared to the massive cruisers operated by older civilizations, but it represented the best technology humanity could produce. Jake was a veteran of Earth's space program, having spent 15 years working on lunar colonies and orbital stations before being selected for deep space exploration. His crew consisted of carefully chosen specialists who shared his enthusiasm for discovery. Lisa Grant served as the chief pilot, a woman whose reflexes and spatial awareness were legendary among Earth's astronaut corps. She could navigate through asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. Paul Henderson ran the engineering department with quiet efficiency, keeping every system running smoothly even when faced with equipment failures or unexpected challenges. Dr. Karen Wells managed the medical bay and also served as the ship's xenobiologist, eager to study any new forms of life they might encounter. The Pathfinder's mission was to survey the Outer Rim territories, regions of space that the Council considered too remote or unimportant for their attention. Jake didn't mind the assignment because it gave his crew the freedom to explore without constant oversight from the more established species. They jumped from system to system, cataloging planets and mapping stellar phenomena. Most of what they found was unremarkable, barren worlds or gas giants that offered nothing of value. But 3 months into their survey mission, Lisa detected something unusual during a routine scan. She called Jake to the bridge with excitement clear in her voice. The sensors showed a planet in the habitable zone of a stable star, with atmospheric readings that suggested the presence of liquid water and breathable air. Jake ordered a closer approach, and what they saw took everyone's breath away. The planet was beautiful beyond description, with deep blue oceans covering 70% of its surface and continents marked by lush green vegetation. There were mountain ranges capped with white snow, vast forests and plains that stretched to the horizon. Paul ran detailed scans and confirmed that the air was not only breathable, but remarkably similar to Earth's atmosphere. Karen detected no signs of dangerous microorganisms or toxic substances in the preliminary analysis. Jake stood on the bridge staring at the view screen and knew they had found something special. He decided to name it Haven because that's exactly what it could be for humanity. A safe haven among the stars. The discovery of Haven sent waves of excitement through Earth's government and scientific community. Ambassador Martinez presented the finding to the Galactic Council, hoping to gain approval for establishing a colony. The Council reviewed the data with minimal interest and granted permission without any discussion. The Vorquin chairman simply stated that humans were welcome to settle on any uninhabited worlds in the Outer Rim territories. Claire felt a small sting at the dismissive tone but pushed it aside. Humanity had found a new home, and that was all that mattered. Within 6 months, the first transport ships arrived at Haven carrying colonists eager to start fresh lives on a new world. Jake watched from orbit as the settlement took shape. Prefabricated structures rose on a coastal plain near the planet's equator, forming the foundations of what would become a thriving community. Families moved into their new homes, children played in streets that had never known war or pollution, and scientists began studying the native ecosystem. The colony grew rapidly as more ships arrived from Earth. Within 2 years, Haven was home to 50,000 people, including farmers, engineers, teachers, doctors, and artists. The colonists sent back reports filled with joy and wonder, describing Haven as paradise. They established farms that produced abundant crops, built schools where children learned under alien skies, and created a society that embodied humanity's highest hopes. Back on Earth, Dr. Vincent Shaw worked in a laboratory funded by the Global Science Initiative. Vincent was a brilliant physicist whose theories on quantum entanglement had pushed the boundaries of human understanding. He spent years developing a new communication system that could send messages instantaneously across vast distances without any delay. Traditional methods required signals to travel at light speed, meaning a message sent from Earth to Haven took weeks to arrive. Vincent's breakthrough would change everything. He successfully tested the quantum communicator in late 2246 and immediately knew this technology would revolutionize galactic civilization. Being a man who believed in cooperation and shared progress, Vincent decided to present his discovery to the Galactic Council as a gift from humanity. Ambassador Martinez arranged for Vincent to address the council during their next session. He stood before the assembled representatives and explained his quantum communication technology in terms that any species could understand. He demonstrated the device by sending an instantaneous message to a receiver on the other side of the galaxy. The message arrived at the exact moment it was sent, proving the technology worked perfectly. Vincent offered to share all his research freely, asking only that the technology be used to benefit all civilizations. The council accepted his gift with barely any acknowledgement. A few representatives nodded. Some made notes on their devices, but there was no applause or expressions of gratitude. The Xanthari representative actually laughed and made a comment to his neighbor about primitive species trying to buy respect with parlor tricks. The casual dismissal of Vincent's achievement hurt more than open insult would have. Claire tried to maintain her diplomatic composure, but felt anger building inside her. This pattern had repeated itself throughout humanity's time in the council. Every contribution was met with condescension. Every achievement was downplayed or ignored. The other species treated humans like children who had wandered into an adult conversation. They were tolerated but not respected, allowed to exist but not valued. During one particularly frustrating council session, Commander Vex of the Xanthari Empire openly mocked humanity's military capabilities. He stood before the entire assembly and declared that humans were too soft, too emotional, and too weak to survive in the harsh reality of the galaxy. He suggested that Earth would have been better off, remaining isolated because they clearly lacked the strength necessary for interstellar civilization. Jake heard about Vex's comments. When the Pathfinder docked at a council space, station for resupply, he felt his jaw clench as he read the transcript of the session. Lisa noticed his tension and asked what was wrong. Jake showed her the report and watched anger flash across her face. Paul read it over her shoulder and shook his head in disgust. Even Karen, usually the calmest member of the crew, expressed frustration at the continued disrespect. But they were explorers, not warriors, scientists, not soldiers. They believed that humanity would eventually earn respect through persistent, peaceful contribution. Jake filed the incident away in his memory and focused on their next survey mission. The Pathfinder left the station and jumped back into deep space, continuing their work of mapping the frontier. None of them knew that everything was about to change in the worst possible way. The attack came without warning on a morning that started like any other on Haven. Children were heading to school, while their parents prepared for another day of work. Building their new civilization, farmers were tending crops in fields that stretched across the fertile plains, and scientists were conducting research in laboratories filled with samples of native plant life. The colony had grown into a bustling community, where 50,000 people had built homes and lives far from Earth. Nobody expected danger, because Haven was located in territory the Galactic Council had explicitly assigned to humanity. There were no disputes over ownership and no conflicts with neighboring species. The colonists felt safe under the protection of galactic law and the treaties Earth had, signed in good faith. The Xanthari warships dropped out of hyperspace directly above the planet, without any attempt at communication or warning. There were 12 massive vessels arranged in attack formation, their weapons already charging as they established orbital positions. Commander Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship and gave the order to commence bombardment. He considered this a demonstration of power, a lesson that would teach humanity their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. The Xanthari had grown tired of watching humans stumble around the galaxy pretending to be equals. Vex believed that destroying one colony would be enough to break human spirit and force them into submission. His crew carried out the orders with cold efficiency, targeting population centers and infrastructure with precision strikes designed to cause maximum damage. The first energy beams struck the main settlement without mercy. Buildings that families had constructed with hope and joy were vaporized in seconds. Schools where children learned and played were reduced to smoking craters. Medical centers, farms, water treatment facilities, and power stations were systematically destroyed. The colonists had no military defenses because they had believed the galaxy's promises of peace. Some tried to flee to emergency shelters, but the bombardment was too fast and too thorough. Parents died trying to shield their children with their own bodies. Teachers perished alongside their students. Scientists were killed in their laboratories, still holding research samples. The attack lasted 4 hours, and when it ended, Haven burned from pole to pole. Captain Jake Morrison and the Pathfinder were 3 days away when they received the distress signal. The message was broken and filled with static, but the terror in the voices was unmistakable. Lisa immediately plotted the fastest course to Haven, while Paul diverted all available power to the engines. Jake stood on the bridge feeling ice form in his stomach as he listened to the fragmentary transmissions. He heard screaming, explosions, and desperate pleas for help that cut off mid-sentence. Karen rushed to the medical bay to prepare for casualties, organizing supplies and setting up every available bed. The journey to Haven felt like an eternity, even though the Pathfinder was traveling at maximum speed. Jake kept trying to raise the colony on communications, but received only silence broken by occasional bursts of static. They arrived to find hell where paradise had been. The planet's surface was scarred by massive impact craters where the main settlements had stood. Fires burned across thousands of square kilometers, creating smoke clouds that darkened the sky. The orbital sensors detected almost no life signs in areas that should have registered 50,000 people. Lisa sat at her console with tears running down her face as she ran scan after scan hoping to find survivors. Paul checked the sensor data 3 times because he couldn't believe what the instruments were telling him. Karen stared at the medical readouts showing the scale of casualties and felt her hands start to shake. Jake forced himself to maintain composure because his crew needed him to be strong, even though everything inside him was screaming. The Xanthari warships were still in orbit, their crews celebrating their successful demonstration. Vex was recording a message to send back to the Galactic Council, explaining how he had dealt with the human problem. The Pathfinder's sensors detected the enemy vessels, but Jake knew his ship stood no chance in combat. The Pathfinder was designed for exploration, not warfare, carrying only minimal defensive systems. Engaging 12 Xanthari warships would be suicide that would accomplish nothing, except adding his crew to the death toll. Jake made the hardest decision of his life and ordered Lisa to keep the ship hidden behind Haven's largest moon. They would search for survivors and then retreat to bring this atrocity to the Council's attention. Lisa wanted to fight despite the impossible odds, but she followed orders and maintained their concealed position. Karen took a shuttle down to the surface with a team of crew members to search for survivors. What they found would haunt them forever. The main settlement was completely gone, replaced by a crater half a kilometer wide. Bodies were scattered across the landscape, burned and broken. Karen worked mechanically, checking each person they found for any sign of life. Most were already dead, but occasionally they found someone still breathing. They loaded the survivors onto the shuttle with gentle hands and words of comfort that felt hollow in the face of such devastation. Among the survivors was a young girl named Sophie, who they found in the rubble of what had been her home. She was 8 years old and had survived by hiding in a basement storage room. Her parents and 2 younger brothers had died in the initial bombardment. Sophie didn't cry or speak when Karen lifted her into the shuttle. She just stared with empty eyes that had seen too much horror for any child to endure. The rescue operation continued for 18 hours before Jake ordered everyone back to the ship. They had found fewer than 200 survivors from a population of 50,000. The medical bay was filled beyond capacity with injured colonists who had lost everything. Karen and her team worked without rest to treat burns, broken bones, and radiation exposure. The physical injuries were severe, but the psychological trauma was even worse. Survivors kept asking about family members who were gone, friends who had perished, children who would never grow up. Sophie sat in a corner of the medical bay wrapped in a blanket and refused to speak to anyone. She had lost her entire family in a single morning of violence that made no sense. Jake recorded everything with the ship's sensors, documenting the destruction and the casualties. He gathered statements from survivors who could speak and compiled evidence of what had happened. The data was clear and irrefutable, showing that this was an unprovoked attack on a civilian population in violation of every treaty and law the Galactic Council supposedly upheld. With heavy hearts, the crew of the Pathfinder left Haven behind and set course for the Council headquarters. The journey took 2 weeks, during which time Jake barely slept. He kept reviewing the evidence and preparing his report, driven by the need to ensure those responsible faced justice. Lisa flew the ship with mechanical precision, her usual joy in piloting completely absent. Paul maintained the systems but spent his free time in the engine room where nobody could see him cry. Karen cared for the survivors with compassion and professionalism while struggling with her own grief and rage. Ambassador Claire Martinez was waiting at the council station when the Pathfinder arrived. Jake had sent an encrypted message ahead explaining what had happened, and Claire had immediately demanded an emergency session of the council. She met Jake at the airlock and saw the change in him instantly. The enthusiastic explorer who loved discovering new worlds was gone, replaced by someone whose eyes held depths of pain and anger. Jake handed her the data files without a word, and Claire felt her own hands shake as she reviewed the contents. The images of Haven's destruction, the casualty reports, the statements from survivors all painted a picture of deliberate mass murder. Claire straightened her shoulders and prepared to bring this before the council, with every expectation that justice would be served. The council chamber was full when Claire presented her case. She showed them the evidence of the Xanthari attack, displayed images of the destroyed colony, and played audio recordings of the distress calls. She presented testimony from survivors, including Sophie's account of watching her family die. Claire spoke with passion and conviction, demanding that Commander Vex and the Xanthari Empire face immediate consequences for their war crimes. She invoked every treaty that protected civilian populations and called for the council to honor the laws they had created. When she finished her presentation, the chamber fell silent. Claire waited for expressions of shock and horror, for immediate condemnation of the attack, for swift action against the perpetrators. Instead, the Vorquin chairman reviewed the data with cold detachment and then dismissed the complaint. He stated that Haven was located in disputed territory, despite the fact that the council itself had assigned the planet to humanity. Several other representatives argued that humans should have defended the colony better if they wanted to keep it. The Xanthari representative stood and claimed that his empire had every right to secure the region against potential threats. Commander Vex faced no arrest, no trial, and no punishment. The council simply moved on to other business as if 50,000 human deaths meant nothing at all. Some council members actually seemed amused by Claire's distress, viewing her emotional response as proof of human weakness. Claire stood in the council chamber, unable to believe what she was hearing. She had expected justice, accountability, and support from the galactic community that Earth had joined in good faith. Instead, she received indifference, victim-blaming, and barely concealed contempt. She looked around at the alien faces and saw no compassion, no empathy, no recognition that something terrible and wrong had occurred. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The Galactic Council did not care about humanity. They never had, and they never would. Earth and its people were nothing more than primitive newcomers to be tolerated when convenient and discarded when troublesome. Claire felt something break inside her, some fundamental belief in the goodness and fairness of the universe. She gathered her evidence and left the chamber without another word. The news reached Earth within hours through Vincent Shaw's quantum communication network. The report spread across every nation and continent, telling the story of Haven's destruction and the Council's betrayal. 50,000 people dead, including 15,000 children, and the galactic powers had simply shrugged. Earth's population responded with shock that quickly transformed into something far more dangerous. Humanity had reached for the stars with open hands and hopeful hearts, only to have those hopes burned away by casual cruelty. The species that had approached galactic civilization with wonder and goodwill now faced a choice between accepting their place as victims or becoming something else entirely. President Helen Carter stood before the unified assembly of Earth's nations with cameras broadcasting her words to every corner of the planet. Her face was pale and tears streamed down her cheeks, but her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. She spoke about Haven and the 50,000 people who had died simply because they dared to build homes among the stars. She talked about the children who would never grow up, the families torn apart, and the dreams reduced to ashes. Then she described the Galactic Council's response and how the supposedly civilized species of the galaxy had dismissed human suffering with casual indifference. Helen's voice broke with emotion, but she continued speaking, telling Earth citizens that humanity could no longer trust the galaxy to protect them or respect them. She declared a state of emergency and announced that Earth was withdrawing from the Galactic Council effective immediately. Every human colony scattered across space would be recalled or fortified. Every resource would be mobilized toward a single purpose, ensuring that nothing like Haven could ever happen again. The response from Earth's population was immediate and unified. Nations that had struggled with conflicts for centuries suddenly stood together with shared purpose. Every government pledged their full support and resources to the mobilization effort. Factories that had produced consumer goods were converted to military manufacturing. Scientists abandoned peaceful research to focus on weapons development. Young people lined up at recruitment centers volunteering for military service in numbers that overwhelmed the processing systems. The mood across Earth was not panic or fear, but cold determination. Humanity had tried peace, and the galaxy had responded with violence. Now humans would show the universe exactly what their species was capable of when pushed beyond the breaking point. Dr. Vincent Shaw locked himself in his laboratory with a small team of trusted colleagues. The man who had freely shared his quantum communication breakthrough with the galaxy now turned his genius toward darker purposes. Vincent understood physics at a level few humans could match, and he knew that the same principles that enabled instant communication could be weaponized. He worked without sleep for days at a time, his mind racing through calculations and theories. His team watched him with concern as he pushed himself to the edge of collapse, but nobody tried to stop him. They all remembered Haven, and they all understood that Vincent's work might be the key to humanity's survival. Within 3 months, Vincent had developed prototypes for weapon systems that exploited quantum mechanics in ways the galaxy had never imagined. Energy weapons that could pierce any known shielding, missiles that could track targets across dimensional boundaries, and defensive systems that bent space-time itself. Colonel Ryan Pierce commanded Earth's Military Strategy Division and was tasked with turning Vincent's theoretical weapons into practical military doctrine. Ryan was a career soldier who had studied every war in human history looking for patterns and lessons. He realized something that the Galactic Council had completely missed. While other species had evolved beyond certain traits that they considered primitive, humanity had retained characteristics forged through millions of years of survival on a hostile planet. Humans could function on minimal sleep, adapt to extreme environments, and maintain focus under conditions that would break other species. Their emotional capacity was not weakness as the Council believed, but strength that enabled both fierce loyalty and terrible wrath. Ryan developed training programs that combined human intuition with ruthless efficiency, creating soldiers who could make split-second decisions and execute complex tactics without hesitation. The galaxy watched humanity's withdrawal with amusement and satisfaction. Commander Vex of the Xanthari Empire boasted openly that humans had learned their lesson and were cowering back on their primitive world. He gave interviews to galactic news networks claiming that the Haven demonstration had succeeded in putting the upstart species in their proper place. The Galactic Council held sessions debating whether to allow humans to remain isolated on Earth or whether the planet should be annexed for use by more worthy civilizations. Several council members argued that Earth's resources were being wasted on a species too weak to properly utilize them. The Vorkan chairman suggested giving humanity 1 standard year to prove they could contribute something of value before taking action. The general consensus among galactic powers was that the human problem had resolved itself and required no further attention. 6 months passed, and Earth's silence deepened. Human ships disappeared from every trade route and diplomatic station across the galaxy. The few remaining human colonies in distant systems either evacuated back to Earth or went completely dark, refusing all communication attempts. Merchant vessels that had carried human goods vanished from the commercial networks. Diplomatic channels that Claire Martinez had worked so hard to establish were abandoned without explanation. The galaxy interpreted this withdrawal as complete surrender and began making plans to divide Earth's territories among themselves. The Council formally declared that humanity had forfeited their membership and any protection that came with it. Several aggressive species immediately filed claims on Earth's solar system and the few remaining human outposts. Captain Jake Morrison stood in a military training facility that hadn't existed 7 months ago. The Pathfinder had been taken for complete redesign, and Jake found himself leading a squadron of pilots who trained with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every person in the facility had volunteered after Haven, and every one of them carried the weight of that tragedy. Lisa Grant had become something entirely different from the cheerful pilot Jake remembered. She moved through training simulations with cold precision, mastering maneuvers that should have been impossible. Her reflexes had always been exceptional, but now she pushed herself to levels that seemed almost superhuman. She flew training runs for 12 hours straight without break, practicing attack patterns and evasive maneuvers until they became pure instinct. Other pilots watched her with a mixture of awe and fear because Lisa had transformed herself into a weapon as deadly as any ship she would command. Paul Henderson worked in massive shipyards that had been constructed in orbit around Earth and Mars. He was part of a team designing vessels that bore little resemblance to the exploration ships humanity had built before. These were warships pure and simple, created with one purpose: to dominate any opponent they faced in combat. Paul incorporated lessons from every naval battle in human history, combining them with cutting-edge technology that Vincent's team kept producing. The new ships could accelerate faster, turn tighter, and absorb more damage than anything in the galaxy's existing fleets. Paul designed redundant systems that would keep ships fighting even after sustaining hits that should destroy them. He created modular designs that allowed rapid repairs and modifications. Every ship became a testament to human engineering driven by the memory of Haven burning. Dr. Karen Wells trained combat medics in a program that would horrify most galactic civilizations. She taught her students how to perform surgery in zero gravity while under fire, how to keep wounded soldiers alive with minimal supplies, and how to function effectively while exhausted and traumatized. Karen had always been compassionate, but Haven had taught her that compassion sometimes meant enabling people to survive long enough to fight back. Her medics learned to work with ruthless efficiency, treating critical injuries in minutes and getting soldiers back into combat as quickly as possible. She developed techniques for managing pain without sedation, because sedated soldiers couldn't fight. The training was brutal and unforgiving, but every medic who completed it became capable of saving lives under conditions that would break most doctors. Sophie lived on a lunar base with other survivors from Haven who had nowhere else to go. She was 9 years old now, and the nightmares had finally started to fade. The base housed families who had lost everything in the attack, and the survivors formed a tight community bound by shared trauma. Sophie spent hours watching through observatory windows as the new fleet took shape in nearby orbital shipyards. Massive warships that dwarfed the old exploration vessels emerged from construction bays one after another. Sophie had stopped speaking for 3 months after Haven, but she talked now, mostly to other children who understood what she had lost. She kept a photograph of her family pinned to the wall beside her bed, their smiling faces frozen in a moment before the universe became cruel. Other survivors did the same, and eventually one wall of the common area became covered with photographs. Thousands of faces looked out from that wall, each one representing someone who had died on Haven. Soldiers and pilots visited the wall before deploying, standing in silence before the photographs of people they had never met, but were sworn to avenge. Commander Vex grew impatient with humanity's continued silence. He had expected Earth to send delegations begging for mercy, or attempting to negotiate new terms for council membership. Instead, there was nothing but silence and empty space where human ships used to travel. Vex found this unsatisfying because he wanted to see humanity broken and submissive. He petitioned the Galactic Council for permission to finish what he had started by delivering an ultimatum directly to Earth. The council granted his request with casual approval, several members commenting that it would be entertaining to see the humans finally beg. They authorized a Xanthari fleet to approach Earth's solar system and demand unconditional surrender. Vex assembled 300 warships, far more than necessary to overwhelm any defense Earth could possibly mount. He planned to broadcast his ultimatum across every communication channel, giving humans 24 hours to surrender. Before he began systematic destruction of their homeworld, the Xanthari Armada entered the Sol system with weapons, ready and sensors scanning for any human resistance. They detected no defensive fleets, no orbital weapons platforms, and no signs of military preparation. Earth appeared completely undefended, just as intelligence reports had predicted. Vex smiled with satisfaction as his fleet took up positions throughout the solar system. He had 300 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, against a species that had barely mastered interstellar travel. This would be less a battle and more an execution. Vex opened communication channels and broadcast his message to Earth, demanding that humanity surrender all territories, submit to Xanthari oversight, and accept permanent status as a subordinate species. He gave them 24 hours to respond before his fleet would reduce Earth cities to rubble. Then he waited for the panicked responses, the desperate pleas, and the inevitable surrender. 23 hours and 59 minutes passed in silence. Vex grew irritated as the deadline approached without any communication from Earth. He had expected humans to spend every moment of that time begging and negotiating. The silence felt wrong somehow, making him uneasy in ways he couldn't quite explain. His tactical officers reported no activity from Earth, no evacuation attempts, and no defensive preparations. The planet just sat there quietly as if waiting for something. Vex decided that humans had accepted the inevitable and were simply too demoralized to respond. He prepared to give the order to begin bombardment when his sensors officer suddenly called out an alarm. Ships were appearing throughout the solar system, emerging from locations that scans had shown empty just seconds before. They came from behind moons, from inside asteroid fields, from orbits that should have been impossible to maintain. They came from everywhere at once, and they numbered far more than 300. The human fleet had arrived, and the galaxy was about to learn exactly what happened when you pushed humanity too far. Jake Morrison sat on the bridge of the redesigned Pathfinder, which now served as flagship for Earth's defense force. He looked at the Xanthari Armada on his screens and felt no fear, no hesitation, and no mercy. 500 human warships surrounded the enemy fleet in a formation that left no escape routes. Jake opened a channel to all ships and gave a single order that had been waiting since the day Haven burned. He told his fleet to engage and show the galaxy what humanity's fury looked like when finally unleashed. Lisa launched her fighter squadron with deadly purpose. Paul's engineering kept every system running at peak efficiency. Karen stood ready to treat casualties but hoped there wouldn't be any. The battle for Earth's future and humanity's soul began with no chance for the Xanthari to retreat or surrender, because humans had learned an important lesson. Sometimes mercy is a luxury that victims cannot afford to give. The battle began with a speed and ferocity that caught the Xanthari completely unprepared. Human ships moved in ways that violated every tactical doctrine the galaxy had established over thousands of years. Lisa Grant led her squadron in a maneuver that used Jupiter's gravity well to slingshot her fighters to speeds that should have torn the vessels apart. Her pilots followed her lead without hesitation, trusting in engineering that Paul Henderson had personally certified. The fighters screamed through space at velocities that made targeting impossible for conventional weapon systems. They struck the Xanthari formation from an angle the enemy commanders had calculated was unreachable and tore through 3 capital ships before the aliens could even adjust their defensive positions. Commander Vex watched his tactical display with growing disbelief. As the human fleet executed maneuvers that seemed impossible, ships that should have been destroyed by gravitational forces instead used those same forces as weapons. Human vessels dove through asteroid fields at full acceleration, using the rocks as cover and as projectiles to hurl at Xanthari ships. One human captain deliberately crashed his damaged destroyer into an asteroid, using the impact to alter the rock's trajectory and send it careening into a Xanthari cruiser. The asteroid hit with such force that the cruiser split in half, its atmosphere venting into space along with its crew. Vex tried to restore order to his fleet, but his commanders were responding to threats from every direction simultaneously. Every time they adjusted formation to counter one attack, humans struck from a different angle. The quantum weapons that Vincent Shaw had developed proved devastating beyond anything the galaxy had encountered. Human missiles didn't follow ballistic trajectories that could be predicted and intercepted. Instead, they phased through normal space, appearing directly beside their targets without any warning. Xanthari point defense systems were useless against weapons that ignored conventional physics. Energy beams from human ships cut through shields that were supposed to be impenetrable, the weapons exploiting quantum frequencies that Xanthari technology couldn't detect or block. One human destroyer took direct hits from 3 Xanthari battleships and should have been vaporized. Instead, its shields bent spacetime around the ship, causing the energy blast to curve away harmlessly, while the destroyer returned fire and destroyed all 3 attackers. Captain Jake Morrison coordinated the fleet with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. Every human ship was connected through Vincent's quantum communication network, allowing them to function as a single organism rather than individual vessels. When one captain identified a weakness in enemy formation, every ship knew about it instantly. When one pilot discovered an effective tactic, the entire fleet adopted it within seconds. The Xanthari had never faced an opponent that could share information and adapt strategies in real time. They were fighting 300 separate battles while humanity fought as one unified force. Jake watched the tactical display and felt no satisfaction, no joy in the destruction he was orchestrating. This wasn't about victory or glory. This was about making sure the galaxy understood that humanity would never again be victims. Paul Henderson monitored engineering systems across the entire fleet from his station on the Pathfinder. He had designed redundancies upon redundancies into every ship, systems that could keep vessels fighting even after sustaining catastrophic damage. A human cruiser lost its main reactor and switched to backups without missing a moment of combat. Another ship had its hull breached in 7 places but sealed the compartments and continued fighting with half its crew exposed to vacuum. Human ships absorbed punishment that would cripple any other vessels and kept coming. Paul had studied Earth's naval history extensively and incorporated lessons from battles where determination and endurance had overcome superior firepower. The Xanthari possessed advanced technology, but humans possessed something more valuable, which was the willingness to keep fighting regardless of damage or casualties. Dr. Karen Wells worked in the medical bay, treating casualties as they came in. The human fleet was taking damage despite its tactical superiority, because 300 Xanthari warships could still land hits through sheer volume of fire. Wounded crew members were rushed to medical stations where Karen and her team performed emergency procedures with practiced efficiency. She worked on a pilot who had lost an arm when his cockpit was breached, stabilizing him and managing his pain without sedation so he could return to duty. Another crew member came in with severe burns covering 40% of his body. Karen treated him with techniques that would keep him functional despite injuries that should have been incapacitating. Her medics moved through the wounded with calm professionalism, saving lives and returning soldiers to their posts as quickly as possible. Every person they saved was one more fighter against an enemy that had shown humanity no mercy. The battle raged for 4 hours, and the Xanthari fleet was systematically destroyed. Human tactics combined unpredictability with ruthless efficiency, never giving the enemy time to adapt or regroup. Lisa's squadron alone accounted for 17 Xanthari ships, her pilots executing attack runs with precision that seemed impossible. One of her wingmen, a young pilot named Chris, had lost his entire family on Haven. He flew with mechanical precision, his every move calculated to inflict maximum damage. When his fighter took critical hits and began to lose power, Chris didn't retreat. Instead, he aimed his crippled ship at a Xanthari command vessel and accelerated to ramming speed. The explosion destroyed the enemy ship and took out 2 others nearby. Jake noted Chris's sacrifice in his report, one more name to add to the list of those who had paid the price for humanity's survival. Commander Vex realized too late that he had made a catastrophic mistake. The species he had dismissed as weak and primitive had transformed into something terrifying. His fleet was being torn apart by opponents who fought with creativity and determination that Xanthari doctrine had no answer for. Vex tried to order a retreat, but human ships had positioned themselves to cut off every escape route. His tactical officers were dead, his ship was crippled, and his armada was dying around him. For the first time in his long military career, Vex felt genuine fear. He watched human vessels destroy the last of his escorts and realized that he was going to die here, killed by the very species he had sought to exterminate. Then his sensors showed something unexpected. The human fleet was pulling back, leaving one Zenthari ship intact while destroying all the others. Vex's damaged vessel drifted alone in space, surrounded by the wreckage of his armada. A communication channel opened and Jake Morrison's face appeared on Vex's screen. The human captain looked tired, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made Vex flinch. Jake spoke in a calm voice that somehow conveyed more threat than any amount of shouting could have. He explained that Vex's ship was being spared deliberately because someone needed to carry a message back to the Galactic Council. Jake's expression never changed as he told Vex that humanity had wanted peace, but the galaxy had chosen violence. Now the universe would learn what humans were capable of when their patience ended and their mercy ran out. Jake ordered his communications officer to transmit files directly to Vex's ship, footage from Haven showing the burning homes and dying children that the Zenthari had created. He made Vex watch every moment of the destruction, every death, every crying child calling for parents who would never answer. Jake continued speaking as the footage played, telling Vex that humanity remembered everything. They remembered Haven, they remembered the Council's indifference, and they remembered every species that had laughed at human suffering. The galaxy had treated humans as weaklings because they valued peace and cooperation. Now humanity would show the universe exactly what happened when a species evolved through millions of years of warfare, finally stopped holding back. Jake leaned forward and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He told Vex to return to the Council and make sure every species understood what had happened here. 300 Zenthari warships had entered human space to demand surrender. Only one would leave, and only because humans chose to allow it. The message was simple and absolute. Humanity would no longer tolerate aggression, would no longer accept disrespect, and would never again allow their people to be slaughtered without consequence. Vex tried to speak, but found he had no words. His ship's engines were damaged, but still functional enough for travel. Human vessels moved aside, creating a corridor through which the crippled Zenthari ship could escape. Vex engaged his engines and fled the Sol system with all the speed his damaged vessel could manage. Behind him, the human fleet remained in perfect formation, 500 warships that had just destroyed a force everyone thought was invincible. The wreckage of the Zenthari armada drifted through, space as a monument to humanity's transformation from peaceful explorers to warriors who would not be pushed again. News of the battle reached the Galactic Council within hours, through multiple channels. Initial reports were dismissed as impossible, because there was no way a primitive species like humanity could defeat 300 Zenthari warships. Then more reports came in from different sources, all telling the same impossible story. The Council demanded verification, and Vex's battered ship jumped into their space, carrying proof that couldn't be denied. Vex appeared before the Council chamber looking broken and defeated, nothing like the confident commander who had left to crush humanity. He showed them footage of the battle, tactical recordings that revealed human capabilities no one had suspected. The Council watched in stunned silence as human ships performed maneuvers that violated known physics and weapons that bypassed every defense the galaxy possessed. Panic spread through the Council chambers as representatives realized what had happened. The species they had mocked and dismissed had just demonstrated military superiority over one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. The Zenthari were supposed to be unbeatable in direct combat, yet humans had destroyed their fleet without losing a single ship. If humanity could do that to the Zenthari, what could they do to everyone else? Council members began arguing frantically about how to respond. Some called for immediate military action against Earth, before humans could become an even greater threat. Others argued for diplomatic approaches and peace negotiations. A few simply sat in shocked silence, trying to process the implications of what they had witnessed. The Vorquin chairman attempted to restore order, but his authority had been shaken by the revelation that his council's dismissal of humanity had created a military power capable of threatening everyone. He called for emergency sessions to discuss the human situation, and every representative attended because they all understood that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The species they had treated as insignificant newcomers had just announced their arrival as a major power in the most dramatic way possible. Humanity's fury had indeed shaken the entire universe, and nothing would ever be the same again. The question now was not whether humans deserved respect, but whether the galaxy could survive the consequences of having pushed them too far. The Council had taught humanity a lesson about galactic politics, but in doing so they had unleashed something they couldn't control and didn't understand. Earth had joined the stars seeking friends and the galaxy had given them enemies. Now everyone would live with the results of that choice. President Helen Carter stood before the Galactic Council 3 weeks after the battle with an expression that held no warmth or deference. She was no longer a supplicant hoping for acceptance, but a leader representing a power that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. Admiral Jake Morrison stood beside her in full military uniform, his presence a silent reminder of what humanity had become. The council chamber was packed with representatives from every member species, all of them desperate to understand what humans wanted and what they planned to do next. Helen looked around at the alien faces that had once treated humanity with contempt and began speaking in a voice that carried absolute authority. She explained that humanity had never wanted war or conflict when they joined the galactic community. They had approached the stars with hope and goodwill, eager to learn and contribute. The galaxy had responded to that hope with cruelty, and the council had responded to their suffering with indifference. Helen presented evidence that her intelligence services had gathered over the past months, files that documented 17 other species who had suffered fates similar to Haven. Small civilizations had been attacked, their colonies destroyed, and their people killed by stronger powers who faced no consequences from the council. She showed records of complaints that had been dismissed, pleas for justice that had been ignored, and victims who had been blamed for their own suffering. The council had built itself on principles of order and civilization, but in practice it was nothing more than a system where the strong preyed upon the weak with no accountability. Helen stated clearly that humanity would no longer participate in or tolerate such a system. Earth was offering an alliance to every species that had been victimized by the Council's failures, a coalition built on genuine justice rather than empty promises. The response from the Council was immediate chaos. Representatives shouted over each other trying to be heard, some demanding that humanity be punished for their aggression, while others desperately offered concessions and apologies. The Vorquin chairman attempted to restore order, but found that his authority meant nothing in the face of human military superiority. Several smaller species immediately accepted Helen's offer of alliance, representatives approaching her with gratitude and relief, evident in their body language. These were civilizations that had lived in fear of stronger neighbors, species that had suffered losses and found no justice through official channels. They saw humanity as their salvation, a powerful protector that actually cared about fairness. The larger empires reacted with anger and fear, recognizing that their dominance was being challenged by a species they had dismissed as irrelevant just months earlier. Dr. Vincent Shaw addressed the council next, presenting the technological advances humanity had achieved in their isolation. He displayed weapons systems that could shatter planets, defensive shields that warped space-time, and propulsion technology that made human ships faster than anything else in known space. Vincent explained calmly that humans could have developed these technologies for peaceful purposes if the galaxy had allowed them to work in safety. Instead, the Council's indifference to Haven's destruction had forced humanity to weaponize their innovations. He made it clear that Earth would share none of these advances with the Council or its member species. The technology would be reserved for humanity and its allies, those who had earned trust through respect rather than demanding it through intimidation. Several Council members protested, loudly, but Vincent simply smiled and reminded them that humanity no longer required Council approval for anything. The Galactic Council began to fracture as the implications of humanity's emergence became clear. Some species attempted to form military coalitions against Earth, seeing humans as a threat that needed to be contained before they became even stronger. These efforts fell apart quickly when potential members realized that nobody actually wanted to fight humanity after seeing what happened to the Xanthari fleet. Other species scrambled to establish diplomatic relations with Earth, offering trade agreements and mutual defense pacts in hopes of staying on humanity's good side. The old power structure that had governed the galaxy for millennia was collapsing, as everyone recalculated their positions based on this new reality. The Xanthari Empire, humiliated and broken, offered formal reparations to humanity along with an official apology for the Haven attack. Their new government had executed Commander Vex for his crimes and several other military leaders who had supported the assault. Helen accepted the Xanthari apology and reparations, but made it clear that forgiveness would take generations to earn. She established strict conditions for any future relations between humanity and the Xanthari, including permanent observers stationed in their territory and immediate intervention rights if they showed any signs of aggression toward other species. The Xanthari had no choice but to accept these humiliating terms because the alternative was continued conflict with an opponent they couldn't defeat. Other aggressive empires watched this transformation and understood that the galaxy's rules had changed. Strength alone was no longer sufficient for dominance, because humanity had proven they could match or exceed any military force while also claiming moral authority through their defense of the weak. Ambassador Claire Martinez worked tirelessly to build the new coalition that Helen had promised. She met with representatives from dozens of smaller species, listening to their stories of suffering under the old council system. Many had experienced attacks similar to Haven. Some had lost entire colonies, and all had found the council unwilling or unable to provide justice. Claire offered them alliance with humanity, protection backed by actual military force, and most importantly, a voice in a system that would actually listen. The coalition grew rapidly as species recognized this as their chance to escape from cycles of victimization. Within 6 months, 43 civilizations had joined what became known as the Terran Alliance, a federation built on principles of mutual defense and genuine equality. Captain Jake Morrison returned to Haven with a fleet of construction vessels and military escorts. The planet still bore scars from the Xanthari attack, but work had already begun on rebuilding. New settlements rose from the ashes of the old ones, stronger and better defended than before. A massive memorial was constructed at the center of the main colony, a crystalline structure that bore the names of all 50,000 people who had died in the attack. The memorial was designed to catch sunlight and scatter it in rainbow patterns across the surrounding area, turning grief into something beautiful. Jake stood before the memorial during its dedication ceremony and spoke about the price humanity had paid to secure their place among the stars. He promised that Haven would never be forgotten and that its people had not died in... Finally, Sophie attended the dedication ceremony, now 11 years old and no longer the silent, traumatized child who had been pulled from the rubble. She had grown stronger over the years, channeling her grief into determination to ensure others never suffered as she had. Sophie had decided to become a pilot like Lisa Grant, already beginning preliminary training despite her young age. She stood before the memorial and looked at the names of her parents and brothers etched in crystal. The pain of their loss would never fully heal, but Sophie had found purpose in that pain. She placed flowers at the base of the memorial and silently promised her family that she would help protect the new galaxy humanity was building, one where children didn't have to watch their worlds burn. Dr. Karen Wells established a hospital on a planet that had been devastated by civil war decades ago, one of the species that had joined the Terran Alliance seeking protection and aid. She worked alongside alien doctors treating refugees from multiple conflicts, sharing human medical knowledge freely with anyone who wanted to learn. Karen had seen enough death and suffering to last several lifetimes, but she refused to become hardened by it. Instead, she channeled her experiences into compassion, using her skills to heal rather than harm. Other human medical personnel followed her example, establishing clinics and hospitals across Alliance territory. Humanity had learned to be warriors, but they refused to let war define them completely. Paul Henderson taught engineering at an academy that trained students from dozens of species in advanced technology and design principles. Human and alien learners worked side by side, sharing knowledge and perspectives that none of them could have achieved alone. Paul emphasized practical problem-solving over rigid doctrine, encouraging his students to think creatively and adapt to unexpected challenges. The academy became a symbol of what the Terran Alliance represented: cooperation and mutual growth rather than domination and exploitation. Students graduated with skills that made them valuable throughout the galaxy, and many chose to stay within Alliance territory where their talents were respected and rewarded fairly. Lisa Grant commanded a carrier group that patrolled the frontiers of Alliance space, protecting member species from external threats and internal conflicts. She had become one of the most respected military officers in human service, known for her tactical brilliance and unwavering dedication to protecting the innocent. Lisa's reputation spread throughout the galaxy, to the point where potential aggressors would reconsider their plans if they knew her fleet was in the region. She never sought glory or recognition, but simply did her duty with the same precision she had always applied to flying. Young pilots from multiple species studied her tactics and tried to emulate her style, though few could match her combination of skill and instinct. The galaxy settled into a new equilibrium over the following 5 years. The old Galactic Council still existed, but its authority had been severely diminished by the emergence of the Terran Alliance. Some species remained loyal to the Council out of tradition or political calculation, but many had shifted their allegiance to the new Federation that actually delivered on its promises of protection and justice. Conflict still occurred because the universe was vast and complicated, but the most egregious abuses of power became rare as potential aggressors knew humanity would intervene. Earth had not conquered the galaxy or imposed their will on other civilizations. Instead, they had created an alternative system based on principles they valued and invited others to join voluntarily. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Pathfinder looking out at the stars during a routine patrol mission. The ship had been rebuilt and upgraded multiple times but retained its original name and purpose as an exploration vessel. Jake was older now, with gray starting to show in his hair and lines on his face that hadn't been there before Haven. He thought often about the price humanity had paid to reach this point. The 50,000 dead on Haven and the thousands more who had died in battle since. The cost had been terrible, but the alternative would have been worse. If humanity had accepted their role as victims, the cycle of violence would have continued, with other species suffering the same fate. By choosing to fight back, humans had broken that cycle and created space for genuine change. Jake received a message from Earth, informing him that President Helen Carter was retiring after leading humanity through its most challenging period. Her farewell address praised the courage and sacrifice of everyone who had transformed Earth from a dismissed newcomer into a respected galactic power. Helen spoke about how humanity had approached the stars with hope, had that hope burned away by cruelty, but had refused to let cruelty define them. They had learned to be strong without becoming oppressors, had learned to fight without losing their compassion. The galaxy was better for humanity's presence, not because humans had conquered anyone, but because they had refused to allow injustice to continue, unchallenged. The final message, broadcast across all of known space, was a promise, and a warning that became known as the Terran Doctrine. Humanity had come to the stars seeking friends and those who offered genuine fry.